Okay, so now let's go look at the chunky electric guitars. So what I want you to see first is that here is our Slate Verb Suite Classics, and I've got it set to the tight and bright room preset. It's the FG 2016, and it's a really nice kind of warm room, but it has that like tiled guitar sound that you'll know it when you hear it. Basically, the point of this is to give the sustain a little bit of a more smooth cutoff, because without them, they feel a little choked, a little too in your face. So the first thing I want you to hear is that. So here's without it. Let me get the chunky part. So you can hear that little tail right there. Right? So that's really just giving it a little bit of depth, okay? So then after that, the only mix I have on them is a little 1176 with the attack turned late to emphasize the transients, release set high just like our guitar solo. From there, those are hitting the guitar master, which is here. That's our C bus. So they are getting this little telephone effect that's happening in the intro, which I think you heard before. And all this is the telephone preset, and then I modified it a little bit. You can see right there, and then it bypasses right as the guitar work comes in. It's set to automatically bypass. So that sounds like this. That's cool. It's a cool effect. That was in the original arrangement from the songwriter, and I thought that's neat. Also, he talks to her on the phone a lot, so I thought that was also neat. Also, I'll throw it in, since the telephone is a little gimmick of our song, I actually printed a telephone sound right here on the lead vocal. So if I unmute the lead vocal real quick, I'm going to turn off all the effects. And then we'll hear the lead vocal real quick. This is what I say. You can hear that I put a little bit of a telephone effect there. So if I mute our lead guitars.
And just for that one phrase? Just
for the one phrase, because if you listen to what he says.
I still hear a voice in my head. I picked the phone up and this is what I said. Hey.
So I thought it was a cool way to give a little textural change to that section. And then what I've done in the mix that you'll hear is that I've muted all of these effects so that the vocal pops forward. It doesn't feel like it's in the background anymore. And then you get to hear that little telephone thing pop up. So there's a start with a telephone, and at the end of verse 2 you get a telephone, which is a neat little kind of textural transition. So back to our chunky electric guitars. They are layered with another guitar on top of them. But before we look at those, let's go back to the main bus and let's see what's happening. A little bit of a dip in the middle. I put it in mid-side mode. Remember, these are hard left and right. So I took a little bit of a mid-dip right beneath the lead vocal, which is sitting right there. So what I found is that in my studio, I have a crappy little JBL iPhone dock. It was like 30 bucks at Fry's. I've got it hooked up to my system. It's my C monitor, and it's the crappy speaker. It's mono. It's 3/4 inch speaker. So I jumped to that and checked my mix, and what I noticed was these guitars were too heavy on the small speaker and were covering up the lead vocal. So I put this on the bus. Again, these are hard left right guitars, so I'm punching a hole underneath the middle channel, right? So anytime that the two guitars would sum mono, because their frequencies are similar, I want to cut some of that, right? So all it is cutting that lows, which you can hear right here. Okay, so when the vocal's in, that makes a pretty big drop. From there, I'm giving them some top end, a lot of top end. What's nice is you kind of hear the pick on metal sound, like thing that happens. It gives it a little bit of cut through rhythm. Then they're going to my good friend, the track spacer. Now the track spacer, I have one on both of the guitar buses. So as we stack up our high guitars later that are going to the D bus, It's the same function. I literally just did a copy and paste. So what is happening is that the vocal key is being sent here. It's in mid-side mode, fast attack, fast release, and I'm just punching a little bit of a hole again in the middle so that when the lead vocal comes in, it kind of ducks the middle channel. Remember, these guitars are hard left and hard right, so in theory, nothing should be getting ducked, but in practice, there is always going to be some phantom center that comes between the two sides because it's the same guitar playing the same groove, so there's going to be some share that happens. It's just the phantom center acoustic anomaly. So I'm gonna reduce that a little bit to make sure there's room for the bass on the lead vocal. Yeah. I could also do that on top of the bass guitar. If the bass guitar was giving us a hard time, that's an option as well. And then of course those chunky guitars are being fed into an L2. Why? Because I want to further reduce the dynamic range here instead of doing it later on in mastering. So if you listen, for most of the record, you can see that the guitars aren't hitting the peak. So what this is going to protect us from is the first strike when an over-exuberant guitar player was like, oh, here's my job, rock, and he's going to hit them extra hard that first time, and then he's going to hear himself and say, oh, that was a little too hard, so I'm going to back off the next one. So that's what I'm controlling here, and I'm doing it with peak limiting instead of with compression. Why? Because I want the transient, not the sustain, to be reduced. If your transients need to be reduced, peak limit. If your sustain needs to be reduced, compression. All right, so what's next? So then, as you can see, this was my original chunk guitar VCA automation. So what you're gonna feel here is the automation duck going into verse 1. These are dynamics. This is what makes songs good. Okay, and then they jump up for the B section of the verse. And then from there, it jumps up for the chorus. And on and on and on. You can see the groove of that. I did that by hand, and by doing it on a VCA, you can see that it affects both lanes in blue. That's the trim advisor right there. So you can see how it's affecting things, but I prefer to do it to the group. It's easier, it's one fader move. Then after that, when my record was almost done, I made another VCA, I grouped them again, and then I just reduced the choruses 1 decibel because I had done a little too much here, but I didn't want to rewrite this automation and then screw up something. It was just easier to kind of double back and do that. I said that earlier in the broadcast, but that's just a good place to kind of reinforce that idea.